It all started one evening when I was sitting on my balcony, staring out at the sunset. I was exhausted, frustrated with the monotony of daily life, and thinking about how I could break free from my routine. That's when it hit me. What if I could sell something that costs nothing but could be marketed as priceless? Something people would never expect to pay for. And then, in that moment of absurd clarity, I decided I was going to sell air. Now, I know what you're thinking. Air? That's right, air. The same air we breathe every single day, for free. But what if I could sell it in a way that would make people believe they needed it, that it was somehow special and valuable? I started brainstorming. The possibilities were endless: eco-friendly air, premium mountain air, clean air from exclusive locations. The marketing options were only limited by my imagination. People were already paying absurd amounts for bottled water, specialty teas, and even fresh watermelons grown in the most remote parts of the world. Why couldn't I do the same with air? I began researching how to capture and bottle air. I read up on various industries, from bottled water to exotic perfumes, to figure out what made those products so attractive to customers. The trick, I realized, was in perception. It didn't matter if I was selling something as intangible and free as air. If I could make it seem rare, valuable, and somehow exclusive, people would buy it. The first step was branding. I created a logo and a sleek, modern bottle design that screamed premium. I even came up with a name for my product, Pure Air, which sounded simple, yet sophisticated. The next step? I set up an online store and prepared for the launch. I knew I had to be bold, but I had no idea just how far this idea would take me. As I hit publish on my website, I couldn't help but wonder, would anyone actually buy air? But deep down, I knew it was the beginning of something bigger than I could ever imagine. After I made the decision to sell air, the first challenge was turning this ridiculous idea into a legitimate product. To the untrained eye, it seemed like a joke. After all, air is free and everyone has access to it. But I saw something different: opportunity. If people could pay for bottled water, why couldn't they pay for bottled air? The first step was to understand how I could actually capture and bottle air in a way that felt special. I knew that my product had to be marketed as something exclusive, something that people could feel privileged to own. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that branding would be the key to success. I began researching other industries that sold products many would consider ridiculous. There were companies selling bottled water from glaciers, artisanal salts harvested from remote caves, and even healing crystals. These things were valuable, not because of their inherent worth, but because of the narrative attached to them. The key was to create a story that people would buy into, something that would elevate the product and convince them that it was worth paying for. I quickly realized that my bottled air would need a story too. I didn't want to sell just any air. I wanted to sell the best air, the kind of air that people would envy. My first product was going to be pure mountain air, fresh air captured from the pristine mountain tops of the Himalayas, the purest air on Earth. Of course, I had never even been to the Himalayas, but in the world of marketing, details like that didn't seem to matter much. The packaging had to scream exclusivity. I hired a graphic designer to come up with a sleek, modern logo and a bottle that looked like it belonged on the shelf of a luxury store. I wanted my customers to feel like they were buying something rare, something only a few privileged people could have access to. The bottle had to look good, and the label had to read like a high-end perfume or rare whiskey. Next, I needed to decide where to source the air. After a few brainstorms and Google searches, I came up with a plan. I would travel to various scenic locations, beaches, mountains, and forests, and capture the air in special containers. I'd even add a bit of flair by claiming the air had unique properties like mountain air known to clear your mind, or forest air for ultimate relaxation. These weren't just marketing gimmicks, they were experiences I could sell and experiences were worth money. I rented a small compressor and started experimenting with ways to capture and store air. The process was tedious, but the more I worked at it, the more confident I became that I could actually make this work. The goal wasn't to create a product people needed. It was to create something people wanted. People don't need bottled water. They want it because it's convenient, trendy, and sometimes it comes with a story. I was going to do the same thing with air. After a few trial runs, I had my first batch of bottles ready for sale. I didn't have any customers yet, but I knew I had something. I wrote compelling product descriptions for my website. Breathe in the purest air on Earth, harvested from the peaks of the Himalayan mountains. Experience the refreshing, crisp sensation with every inhale. I also added social proof, showing photos of beautiful mountain landscapes and even staged pictures of myself collecting the air in scenic locations. I launched my website, and I'll admit, I was nervous. I wasn't sure if anyone would buy my air, but there was only one way to find out. The first few days were slow. No one was biting, but then something unexpected happened. A small group of people started sharing my website on social media. They thought it was hilarious, but the more they shared it, the more others started to believe it was a real product. Some influencers even got involved, tagging my brand in their posts, joking about how pure mountain air was the next big thing. It was working. Slowly but surely, I started getting orders. At first, it was a trickle, just a few bottles every day. But the more people ordered, the more I realized that I had done something right. I wasn't just selling air, I was selling a concept, an experience, a status symbol. Just when I thought my business was starting to level off, something extraordinary happened. The orders began pouring in from places I never expected. It wasn't just friends or family buying my bottled air anymore. Strangers, influencers, and even journalists were taking an interest in the absurd idea I had turned into a reality. It started with a single tweet. One influencer, known for their playful sarcasm and love for novelty products, tweeted about pure mountain air. The tweet read, "Is this real? Apparently, you can now buy air from the Himalayas. So naturally, I just ordered a bottle. Let's see if it actually makes me feel like I'm hiking the highest peaks of Nepal." Yash, pure mountain air. Ja, the air we breathe. Luxury air. I couldn't believe it. The tweet was shared hundreds of times. People started commenting, some in disbelief, others amused, and a few even asking where they could buy it. The tweet became a viral sensation. Within hours, my website traffic skyrocketed. I immediately ran to my laptop to check my analytics. I was stunned. In just a few hours, my website had gone from a handful of visitors to thousands. Orders were coming in from every corner of the globe. People were paying for something they knew was completely absurd, but that was the beauty of it. They weren't buying air. They were buying the story, the experience, and the novelty of it all. This was when the real hype began. More and more influencers jumped on the bandwagon. Some made unboxing videos. Others posted funny reviews on their stories, talking about how they felt rejuvenated after breathing my bottled air. One influencer even created a skit about how pure mountain air made their yoga practice more spiritual, and it was so over the top that it gained tens of thousands of views. But it wasn't just the influencers. As the social media buzz grew, people started sharing their own air experiences. My customers weren't just consumers, they were becoming evangelists. They shared photos of themselves inhaling from the bottles, and some even started creating their own air collection from different locations around the world. One person asked me if I could source air from a volcanic island for them. I couldn't believe it. People were starting to request specific types of air, each more ridiculous than the last. The press caught wind of the phenomenon. Journalists from lifestyle magazines and quirky websites started reaching out to ask for interviews. One journalist asked, "Is this the most absurd product ever created, or is it pure genius?" My answer? It's both. By the time the first few weeks passed, I had sold thousands of bottles. I had gone from zero to millionaire in the span of a few months, all by selling something that cost me literally nothing to produce. Of course, the cost of the branding, the bottles, and the marketing was substantial, but the margins were still massive. The best part? My customers didn't mind paying the price for what was essentially bottled air. Some people bought it for the novelty. Others bought it as a conversation piece. And a select few even genuinely believed that the air they were inhaling was somehow better than regular air. It didn't matter why they bought it. They bought it. I quickly expanded the product line. Pure Mountain Air became my flagship product, but I now offered limited editions like Pure Desert Air, collected from a remote desert in the Middle East, and Pure Forest Air, captured from the depths of the Amazon rainforest. Each one had its own story, its own unique branding, and people loved it. They couldn't get enough. The demand kept increasing, and so did the price. What had started as a whimsical experiment turned into a full-blown business. I had a team, a warehouse, and my own brand of air that was now being sold worldwide. But what happened next truly blew my mind. I became a trendsetter. Other companies started popping up, trying to replicate my idea, selling air from beaches, cities, and even air captured at high altitudes during flights. It was surreal. What had begun as a joke had turned into a legitimate trend. I had somehow managed to capitalize on the most ridiculous product and turned it into a viral sensation. As the demand for Pure Mountain Air soared, so did the challenges. What began as a quirky, light-hearted idea soon spiraled into a whirlwind of success. And with that success came a series of problems I hadn't anticipated. While I had built a profitable business, I was now grappling with the chaos of managing it all. First came the logistics. The orders kept coming in, and I quickly realized that I needed to scale up my operations. I couldn't just keep packaging bottles of air myself anymore. I needed a team. I hired a few people to help with packaging, shipping, and customer service. It felt like everything was moving at a breakneck pace. We were working around the clock just to keep up with demand. Then came the inevitable complications. The suppliers of my bottles began to run out of stock. The bottling company that was creating the sleek containers for Pure Mountain Air couldn't keep up with the order volume. I was forced to switch suppliers, but that introduced delays and quality control issues. Suddenly, I had customers complaining about damaged bottles or air that smelled like plastic instead of the crisp, fresh scent they expected. I had to figure out how to maintain quality while keeping costs low, which was no small feat. And then there were the legal issues. I had never imagined that selling something as absurd as air could land me in a courtroom, but that's exactly what happened. Some larger corporations took notice of my little startup and decided it was time to take action. A major beverage company, which had started selling premium bottled air as part of their brand expansion, claimed that my brand was infringing on their trademark. I never expected to be embroiled in a legal battle over air, but here I was, fighting against a much larger corporation with far more resources than I could ever dream of. But despite these growing pains, the business continued to thrive. The press was still buzzing about Pure Mountain Air, and I was appearing in interviews almost every other day. People still loved the novelty, and the more absurd my product seemed, the more curious people became. The press coverage was relentless. "This guy is selling air and made millions" was the headline of one major news outlet. "Breathe in the freshness of luxury" became the tagline used by multiple influencers in their videos. The strangest part was that I started being invited to speak at events. At first I thought it was a joke. Me speaking at a business conference? But people were actually interested in how I had built my business from the ground up. The most surreal moment came when I was asked to do a TED talk. TED Talk? Me? It didn't make any sense. A year ago, I was just a guy sitting on my balcony thinking about how I could make money by selling something ridiculous. And now I was being asked to talk about the philosophy of selling air. But with the success came the pressure, the constant need to innovate, to stay ahead of the competition and to maintain the illusion of exclusivity and luxury. Every day felt like I was walking a tightrope. If I made one wrong move, I could lose everything. The expectations were through the roof, and I had to find new ways to keep people engaged. I began brainstorming new product lines. Instead of just offering Pure Mountain Air, I expanded the brand into the Pure Air Experience line. I created themed air bottles, Pure Yoga Air for the wellness crowd, Pure Beach Air for those who love the coast, and Pure City Air for the urban explorers. Each one came with its own unique story, its own branding, and a carefully crafted narrative that made it feel like something you had to have. Yet, despite all the expansion, there was always the underlying fear that this wild ride could come to an end. What if people grew tired of buying air? What if the trend faded as quickly as it had begun? The thought haunted me. I knew I had to constantly innovate to keep my business alive in the saturated market I had inadvertently created. But for the time being, the air business was booming. I had become a millionaire, and the absurdity of it all was never lost on me. Selling air, something that was free, had turned into my path to wealth, fame, and a life I had never dreamed possible. But it also came with stress, complications, and constant innovation. It was a roller coaster ride, and there was no telling where it would end. As quickly as Pure Mountain Air had risen to fame, it seemed like everything started to fall apart. The success that I had once celebrated was now becoming my biggest burden. My company had become a viral sensation, but the very viral nature of it also meant it was prone to fleeting trends. What went up must come down, and I was about to experience the crash. The first signs of trouble were subtle. A few customers started posting complaints online, questioning whether the air they had bought was really as pure as promised. Some even claimed it smelled like nothing more than recycled air, accusing me of using cheap methods to capture it. It was a slap in the face. I had gone to great lengths to create the illusion of luxury, and yet people were starting to doubt my product. I couldn't ignore the growing number of returns. What once seemed like a novelty had started to wear off. The excitement that came from owning a bottle of Pure Mountain Air was fading. People who had purchased the product out of curiosity were now less inclined to buy more. The initial novelty of paying for air was wearing thin. But the biggest issue came from the competition. At first, I was the only one selling bottled air, but as the trend exploded, imitators flooded the market. There were now dozens of companies selling premium air from various locations around the world. They had caught on to the concept, and they were doing it with more resources and better branding than I could ever afford. They started offering better packaging, higher quality marketing, and more realistic claims about the purity of their air. I was losing my edge. The exclusivity that had once made Pure Mountain Air so appealing was now being diluted by the sheer number of competing brands. The market had become saturated, and there was no way to stand out anymore. Every new brand was just a variation of my idea, but bigger, better, and more refined. I had become the original idea, but my concept was now the baseline. Meanwhile, the legal battles were still ongoing. The corporate giants that had previously sued me weren't letting up. They had deep pockets, expensive lawyers, and resources that I couldn't compete with. My legal fees were mounting, and the pressure to settle was growing stronger. I tried to hold out, but eventually the stress became too much. I had to agree to a settlement that cost me millions of dollars in damages. What was once a playful and ridiculous idea had now turned into a fight for survival. On top of that, my team was beginning to crack under the pressure. The rapid growth had been overwhelming, and many of my employees were starting to burn out. I had expanded so quickly that I hadn't put enough thought into creating a sustainable structure. Now my warehouse was disorganized, the customer service team was overwhelmed, and I was barely keeping up with the demands of the business. I had never been prepared for how quickly the wheels would come off. The breaking point came when I received an email from one of the major e-commerce platforms I had been using to sell my product. They had received multiple complaints about the quality of Pure Mountain air and, as a result, had decided to remove my product from their marketplace. In a matter of hours, my sales on that platform came to a screeching halt. It was a major blow, and I realized that the entire business model I had built was crumbling. I wasn't just losing customers, I was losing my credibility. I tried to salvage what I could. I launched new products and attempted to keep the momentum going, but the market was no longer interested. My core customers had moved on to other trends, and the general public had lost interest in buying something as absurd as bottled air. The viral hype that had launched my business had burned bright and fast, but now it was fading. Looking back, it's clear to me that my success wasn't just the result of a brilliant business idea, it was the result of timing, novelty, and the crazy nature of the Internet. The same viral energy that had made Pure Mountain air a phenomenon was also the force that would ultimately lead to its downfall. In the end, the business I had built was unsustainable. It wasn't just about selling air, it was about creating something people wanted to talk about, to laugh at, to share. Once that novelty wore off, there was nothing left to keep the business afloat. My dream of becoming a millionaire through the sale of bottled air had come true, but the price of that success was far greater than I had ever anticipated. When Pure Mountain Air finally collapsed, it wasn't just the business that was at risk, it was my entire identity. I had gone from being the quirky entrepreneur with a viral sensation to a cautionary tale. There's a certain kind of shame that comes with falling from the heights of success, and I felt it deeply. I had lived in the bubble of rapid growth for so long that I hadn't realized how fragile it all was. The first few months after the business tanked were some of the hardest of my life. I had to let go of my employees, close the warehouse, and dismantle the brand. What had once felt like a brilliant idea now felt like a huge mistake. I had spent all of my time, energy, and resources building a product that, in the end, didn't have lasting value. I hadn't built a sustainable business model. I had built a novelty. And when the novelty wore off, so did the customers. I often found myself reflecting on what had gone wrong. Sure, the idea had been absurd from the start, but it had worked for a time. The product was something that people found entertaining, something they could talk about, and for a brief moment, it gave them an experience they'd never forget. But it wasn't sustainable. I hadn't put enough thought into how to maintain the hype once it started fading. I had relied too heavily on viral attention and not enough on creating a real product that added value to people's lives. At the same time, I had been naive. I never truly thought through the implications of building a business around something so fundamentally ridiculous. The competition had caught up quickly, and I hadn't been prepared for the influx of similar products flooding the market. While I was basking in the glow of my viral success, I failed to realize that the world doesn't stay captivated by novelty for long. The legal battles had been another major factor in my downfall. I had underestimated the corporate giants that would come after me. I had taken for granted that my idea was too absurd for anyone to care about, but it turned out that my success was threatening to larger companies. They saw my growing popularity and wanted a piece of the action, or at the very least, wanted to eliminate the competition. I learned the hard way that even the most outlandish ideas are fair game for those who have the resources to protect their own interests. But amid the fallout, there were lessons to be learned. I realized that a business built purely on novelty and viral success is never going to be a sustainable one. To build something lasting, it has to have real value. I had been caught up in the excitement of the moment, chasing after quick fame and fortune, and I had neglected to think about the long term. But even in failure, I found an unexpected gift: experience. I had learned how to build a brand from scratch, how to navigate the complexities of marketing, how to manage a team, and how to scale a business quickly. I had been thrust into the world of e-commerce, social media marketing, and legal battles without any real preparation, and while the outcome wasn't what I had hoped for, the knowledge I gained was invaluable. Eventually, I picked myself up and began to rethink my approach. I realized that success in business is not just about having a good idea. It's about having the foresight to understand what will keep your product relevant in the long run. It's about providing real value to your customers, not just selling them an illusion. I didn't give up on entrepreneurship after the fall of Pure Mountain Air. In fact, it was the failure that propelled me forward. I knew that my next business would be built on a solid foundation, one that was sustainable and adaptable to change. I wasn't going to chase after the next viral trend. I was going to create something that could stand the test of time. As I reflect on the rise and fall of Pure Mountain Air, I can't help but laugh at how absurd it all was. But it's also a reminder that, in the world of business, success isn't just about timing or novelty. It's about creating something that lasts. I may have sold air for a while, but the real lesson was in learning how to breathe through the ups and downs of entrepreneurship. After the collapse of Pure Mountain Air, I found myself at a crossroads. I could have walked away from entrepreneurship entirely, convinced that my journey had reached its peak, or I could rise from the ashes and learn from my failures. There was no denying that the experience had been humbling, but deep down, I knew I wasn't finished yet. The lessons I had learned through the chaos of running a viral business had given me a new perspective on what it really takes to succeed. I started by reflecting on what went wrong, but more importantly, I focused on what went right. There were aspects of Pure Mountain Air that were incredibly successful. The brand's ability to capture attention, its viral growth, the way it resonated with people's desire for something new and absurd. These were the elements I needed to harness for my next venture. But this time, I knew I had to approach things differently. I had to build a business that was grounded in more than just novelty. It needed to have staying power, something that could withstand the test of time. The first step was revisiting the idea of providing something valuable to my customers. What I had done with Pure Mountain Air was create a sense of experience, a moment of novelty that was fleeting but powerful. But this time, I wanted to create an experience that people could return to, a product or service that offered real, long-term value. With this in mind, I decided to pivot my focus to sustainability. I had seen firsthand how people reacted to the idea of luxury and exclusivity, and I wanted to take that energy and channel it into a new direction, one that aligned with the growing demand for eco-friendly products. I began researching sustainable business models and looking for ways to create a product that would resonate with environmentally conscious consumers. The idea came to me one night while I was walking through a park. I passed by a group of people participating in a community cleanup, and I realized that people were starting to care more than ever about the environment. There was a genuine movement towards sustainability, and people were willing to pay a premium for products that aligned with their values. That was when it hit me. I could create a brand that not only appealed to the desire for luxury and novelty, but also made a positive impact on the planet. I dove into the research. I explored eco-friendly packaging, sustainable sourcing, and innovative materials that could be used to create a product with minimal environmental impact. I reached out to suppliers who shared my vision and began developing prototypes for a new product that would blend luxury with sustainability. My goal was to create something that felt exclusive, but was also genuinely good for the planet. As I worked on this new idea, I realized that I needed to build a brand from the ground up. This time, I was going to take my time. I wasn't going to rush into the market or rely on viral trends. I would build a strong foundation, focusing on authenticity, transparency, and trust. I knew I had to be honest with my customers about the environmental impact of my product and how it was made. The key to success would be creating something that people could be proud to own, something that felt meaningful and had a purpose. I also made a point of incorporating the lessons I had learned from my previous business. I understood that customer experience mattered more than ever. I focused on creating an exceptional experience for my customers from the moment they interacted with my website to the unboxing of their product. I wanted to deliver something that wasn't just a product. It was a statement. Soon enough, the first batch of my new product arrived, and I launched my new brand. It wasn't a viral sensation, but I didn't want it to be. This time, I wasn't chasing fleeting attention. I was focused on building something sustainable. The response was positive, and slowly but surely, my business began to grow. It wasn't explosive growth like before, but it was steady, grounded, and most importantly, it was real. I kept the momentum going by telling the story of my journey. I shared the lessons I had learned from Pure Mountain Air and how they shaped my new business. People appreciated the transparency, and many of them felt connected to my brand's mission. It wasn't just about selling a product anymore. It was about creating a community of people who believed in making a difference. While my new business didn't become an overnight sensation, it had a foundation that was much more stable. And more importantly, I had learned that success doesn't come from chasing the next big trend. It comes from understanding what your customers really value and building a business that reflects that. In the end, the failure of Pure Mountain Air didn't define me. It refined me. It taught me that the road to success is rarely linear. The real growth happens when you learn from your mistakes, adapt to change, and stay true to your values. My comeback wasn't about repeating the past. It was about using what I had learned to build a better future. And that, I realized, was the true meaning of success.